Our webinar today is Validating Mineral Product Safety Using Science to Determine GHS and HazCom Classifications. Don Ewert's presentation will give us a glimpse of how science can be used to achieve reclassification in the mining, minerals, and aggregates industry. Don has presented similar studies at the Society of Mining Engineers Mine Exchange 2020 conference for the Product Stewardship Society, the American Society of Safety Professionals, and the International Occupational Hygiene Association. Here are a few housekeeping items. You should be hearing me now. In case audio clarity is poor, you actually have two options for audio. One is through your computer, but if that isn't working, you can also dial in. Just click No Audio on the right of your screen and call in via the phone number sent to you from RJ Lee Group at 1 p.m. Eastern Time today. You are already muted, so don't worry about muting your line. Everyone will be muted through the course of the webinar today, but you can ask questions at any time by using the question function on your GoToWebinar panel, probably at the right of your screen. In the question feature, only the moderator will see what is being typed, and I'll get to as many questions for Don as possible at the end of the presentation. Also, in that panel to the right, I've attached 4 handouts. You won't need them for the presentation, but they're informational on how RJ Lee Group One is how RJ Lee Group offers a full range of laboratory, analytical, and consulting services to support mining and mineral processing operators. The second handout is on RJ Lee Group's industrial hygiene capabilities. The third handout is our 2020 lab testing guide, where you can see pricing, our lab accreditations, and a multitude of lab services available from RJ Lee Group. And the fourth handout is a product stewardship data sheet, which explains XRMC. Also, at the end of the webinar, a survey will pop up. Please take the 30 seconds to rate the webinar on technical content and let us know if you have any ideas on future webinar topics which RJ Lee Group should consider. This survey helps us to be better and deliver better information, so please help us out by quickly answering those 3 questions. Okay, here are our 2 webinars coming up this spring, one on nuisance dust and one concrete durability issues from aggregate. Please check out our website main page, where anytime you can see planned webinars which RJ Lee Group has coming up. We just want to let our attendees know how our company has a long history of working with the aggregates industry and are a member of several associations like the NSSGA, SME, and the Vermiculite Association, for example. We support management of products in the marketplace and work in industrial hygiene, helping clients with issues like indoor air quality and nuisance dust. For the mining industry, we provide a full range of laboratory and analytical and consulting services to support mining and minerals process operators. Okay, so now let me introduce our presenter, Don Ewert. Don has experienced a career of practice in occupational health and specializes in developing risk reduction plans and management strategies to minimize exposure to extremely hazardous substances. Accordingly, he's worked extensively as both a hygienist and toxicologist, performing vivarium studies, preparing GHS compliant documents, and developing numerous international guidance policies affecting sampling methods, engineering controls, and occupational safety. As a frequent presenter on the topic of occupational, environmental, health and safety, Don is a recognized subject matter expert and participates globally in advanced OEHS training programs, industry events, and professional development meetings. His research findings are published across numerous peer-reviewed journals and available in multimedia format, including books, magazines, and webinars. With this said, I welcome Don and the exciting overview he's about to provide on RJ Lee Group's product stewardship services.
Thank you, Dennis, and good day, everyone. I'm glad to have you here. So before I start, I want to introduce the team that represents our product stewardship group. It's actually made up of about 15 to 20 people with a slight rotation, depending on what the expertise area we need. But the three members that travel with me to conferences and to exhibitions and to meeting with clientele are Dr. Alan Levine, who's a microbiologist, a physicist, and a biochemist. Dr. Stephen Monaco is a chemical engineer and does a lot of work with us on data management. And finally, Dr. Shaquille Sagir, whom I've worked with for over 20 years, is a toxicologist and a pharmacologist, and also board certified in both U.S. and Europe. So that is our core team, without going into additional details, and I don't mean to leave so many people out because we do have a large group that actually focuses on this subject. So one of the fun things that I've been able to do since I came to RJ Lee Group is to be able to tap into the unbelievable resource that this company has in the scientific arena. RJ Lee Group is by far one of the premier labs in the nation. I look at it like a university laboratory on steroids because of the fact that it's commercial. We can move very quickly, and we can move through all of the types of analysis you may normally see being done in a university, plus a few they don't have. We also have leading edge instrumentation across the company, including a mobile laboratory that is probably one of the best in the world. We utilize it in the U.S. as well as Europe and other countries, and it's able to do drug sniffing as well as explosives, and now potentially moving into the coronavirus arena. One of the other areas of extreme expertise, and this relates to Rich Lee and the early career fields for him with electron microscopy. When I first started here, RJ Lee had about 40 microscopes running 24 hours a day. I don't know exactly where we're at now, but we are one of the largest electron microscopy firms in the world. And by far, the expertise in electron microscopy that's represented by this organization is superior to most entities and certainly a lot of universities, which is where we draw our people from. So, with all that said and the advertising complete, let's move into the subject matter that we're all here for, GHS. And what's going on with this? Well, when GHS first began, it was because of a problem across the world. And chemical management is a serious problem. And so before GHS regulation, you can see how coffee or caffeine was classified around the world, from harmful to toxic, non-haz, to non-toxic, and hazardous. So that's kind of a problem. And globally, this becomes an issue when we're moving products and chemicals from country to country and determining whether something's actually hazardous or not. And there were a lot of people getting hurt. So the United Nations came together and created the globally harmonized system of classification and labeling. And under GHS regulation, caffeine is now rated as toxic if swallowed with an LD50 and the skull and crossbones. So once this came about, it was a bit of a classification shock for organizations that distribute products and chemicals across the marketplace. And classification shock meaning a realization that the chemical is now more hazardous than once thought, either because of the new classifications OSHA put in place, or in many cases because the hazards were not evaluated properly the first time. So what is the core behind this? Well, what's the core is behind it is that under GHS, and as you can see from Appendix A 1910-1200, OSHA's adoption word for word of the GHS rules is the classification criteria. So if a product contains, for example, acutely toxic chemical, and it's at a concentration level of 1% by weight, and that means equal to or greater than, so it has to be less than 1% to not be classified. It's got to be rated as acute toxicity. That is caffeine. Skin corrosion, irritation, serious eye damage, respiratory skin sensitization. Notice that's 0.1 weight percent, and a lot of materials and chemicals get captured in that. Carcinogenicity, which is what relates to crystalline silica, has to be less than 0.1% weight. So as a result, this classification criteria is what has caused classification shock. And in the end, you end up with a hazardous safety data sheet and warning symbols on all your products. This is play sand, which is the focus of today's webinar. You get the signal word danger, and of course you get the exploding lung and the exclamation mark. Carcinogen category 1A, STOT category 3, STOT category 1 for repeated. That's the crystalline silica lung diseases, and an eye irritant category 2B. So overall, the operational impact to companies of GHS hazard classification, which is what firms have now experienced for the last 10 years, is products with physical and or health hazards increase development costs and require SDS document controls. Obviously, you can no longer just put a product on the market without having it properly classified. Hazardous product handling necessitates engineering controls and worker protective measures. This is a tremendous burden for organizations. Once you create a hazardous safety data sheet, you are not only required to produce that, put it out with your product, give it to your customers, but you too need to follow those rules. So your workers may need to be in respirators, your dock workers may need to have engineering controls, and all of a sudden your costs have skyrocketed as well as those of your end consumer. Spill response measures have to be updated and enhanced. If you're going to ship a hazardous material, or you're going to handle truckloads or barge loads or large bags, and you have a spill, you have to have spill response measures. Regulatory requirements are expanded across all agencies, not just one or two. This isn't just about OSHA. It now becomes about EPA and airborne emissions. It becomes about Clean Water Act and emissions into the drain. It becomes about RCRA and disposal requirements. It comes into play with DOT. Additionally, you now get to report to your community because it's going to trigger Tier 2 reporting requirements. Products have to carry a warning provision in the language of each destination country. This could be a bit challenging, particularly in countries where you've got 2 or 3 different languages. This is probably the one area where we see clients' products get held up the most, is a English-written SDS for a foreign country that was not translated because they didn't want to pay for the translation, and it got generated, the product got shipped, and now their product's held up at the dock because it doesn't have Spanish, something as simple as Spanish for all of South America and Mexico. It doesn't have the right foreign languages for some countries that have 2 or 3 languages, etc. Canada is another one with French. Products must be shipped as hazardous, increasing transportation cost, handling fees, and time to destination. While a lot of companies don't see this as a big deal, customers end up paying the price, which means we all end up paying the price for this. So, our goal as occupational health experts is to stop reporting everything as a Prop 65 chemical, so when you walk up to a building, it notifies you that this building is going to kill you. We don't want that. We don't want every chemical reported as hazardous, because that then means that those chemicals that are truly hazardous are going to be ignored because everything is hazardous. So what we want to do is find a means and a method for doing this properly so that we can get chemicals properly classified. So let's start with the life cycle. Where does the hazard exist? Is it in the raw ingredients? Is it in the finished product? The one that you actually present at the dock, when you present it to your shipper, when you receive it? Is it in the anticipated use in extreme upset? Or finally, is it post-application? Does something happen to that product after it's applied that makes it hazardous? Examples. Johns Manville polyurethane foam, we use it everywhere. We use it in our homes. We use it in our cars. We're very accustomed to being around polyurethane foam. This is just component A. Component A is acute tox 4, skin irritation 2, eye irritation 2, respiratory sensitization category 1, and skin sensitization category 1. Those are extremely hazardous categories because that is what leads to anaphylactic shock. So once you have respiratory sensitization, if you get at a certain level with it, if you know people that have peanut allergies, that is respiratory sensitization. And this can lead to death, so it's extremely critical. Specific target organ toxicity, category 1. So this has the exploding lung as well as the exclamation. So in the raw ingredients form, this comes as a 2-part kit. Both are chemical parts. So all we have listed here is component A. So in the raw ingredients, we know that this material, as presented at the dock, is hazardous. And in fact, we're going to wear suits, we're going to wear respiratory protection when we apply it, and we know that throughout the process of handling at the dock, as presented, and in application, this is hazardous. Post-application, it's not hazardous, and we live with it every day. In fact, some of us will even use it for Halloween costumes for our children. Meat tenderizer. Meat tenderizer is an interesting case because you now move into rules for products. So meat tenderizer contains two ingredients that are hazardous. One is tricalcium phosphate, the other is the papain, which is the ingredient that breaks down the proteins and the enzymes. Both are irritants. Okay, they're not real high classification irritants, but they are. But you'll notice that papain is also a respiratory sensitizer category 1, which, as I just explained, can be extremely dangerous. So at the raw ingredient phase, when the company McCormick brings in the raw ingredients, those raw ingredients are labeled. When McCormick then blends these raw ingredients into the seasoning, the raw ingredients become agglomerated, they become coagulated, they become emulsified, and they become part of the seasoning. So those raw ingredients are no longer bioavailable. So when it's presented at the dock, which when we go to the grocery store, meat tenderizer is not hazardous. When we use it, we don't know of anyone who's ever gotten anaphylactic shock or severe respiratory sensitization from meat tenderizer. It doesn't mean it doesn't happen, just that it's not something that we see in the news. And finally, post-use, num-num. Okay. And the subject for today's webinar is about natural play sand. This came about when we were looking for a good material to do validation work with. Well, lo and behold, one of the best materials we could find was play sand. We also collected beach sand from 5 or 6 different beaches around the country, and we used these materials for our validation. Well, this has been part of the presentation for a long time, and when I made this presentation to the Product Stewardship Society a couple of years ago, and this slide was in there, I, of course, got the Corporate Sustainability Director for Lowe's, who talked to me afterwards and said, you know, it seems a little unfair, but I said, well, take a look at the issue. So you're selling this product on your shelves, you've got a silica hazard warning for both that and traction sand, and then you put the picture of a child playing in a sandbox on the package and tell people you're going to kill their child. Well, how true is that? Well, it didn't take but a couple of weeks, and this packaging was no longer on Lowe's shelves. Sackcrete changed the packaging, dropped the picture of the child, and you'll notice, just to be fair to Lowe's, that Home Depot offers the exact same product from Sackcrete and a Prop 65 warning that says we're going to kill the child that plays in that sandbox. So is it true or isn't it true? We're grandparents, we're parents, and we were once children. Do we prevent anyone from playing in a sandbox because of Prop 65 or a GHS warning label? No. Okay, we've got a problem here. We're not saying what we're doing. We're not walking the talk. Okay, so let's figure out why this is the case, and let's get this corrected and either remove these labels or get the pictures of the children off and let people know that it's harmful. To do that, we're going to use a top-down approach, not the bottom-up. We're not going to base it on ingredients. We're going to base it on hazards that exist in the product when it's received at the dock, what we call as presented. A little bit of background, because all this involves toxicology. This is what it's all based on. So, crystalline silica received its carcinogenicity classification from the International Agency for Research on Cancer. And during that assessment, IARC determined that particles with an aerodynamic diameter of less than 3 to 4 microns are respirable. Cool. Particles greater than 5 microns may not reach the alveolar region. That's well known in the toxicology area. Trace impurities affect the biological activity. Well, now there's a revelation. The National Toxicology Program does not define respirable crystalline silica. OSHA does not define what respirable crystalline silica means. They all say that particles that are respirable. Okay, well, let's dig a little deeper into this and demonstrate the toxicology behind respirable particulate. Particles in less than 10 micron are by convention considered to be respirable because at the time that the cyclone was developed, this was believed to be the most conservative and best method for determining the respirable aerosol levels when you do industrial hygiene sampling. What's interesting, that even OSHA's own cyclone graph stops at 8. So particles less than 8 microns actually represent the size range subject to OSHA regulation, although 10 microns is the common cut point by convention. IARC goes further in its original documentation to state that a mean aerodynamic diameter of 1.4 microns with a range of 0.3 to 4 was reported on the alveolar duct terminal bronchial surfaces. That is the toxicology. Additionally, a more recent paper from 2013 in the particle and fiber toxicology journal states that for typical activity levels and breathing habits, we estimated an aerodynamic diameter of around 3 microns in adults. So the 5 micron cut point has been substantiated, and we use 5 microns for purposes of GHS. We do not use 5 for Prop 65 because Prop 65 is based on Department of Labor regulation, and Department of Labor is 10 microns. So the last thing on toxicology is what makes crystalline silica toxic. If it's toxic, why? If you look at the particles on the left, those are freshly fractured rock. If you look at the particles on the right, that's play sand. That's beach sand. Notice how they're well rounded off. They also do not have the reactive surfaces. And that's what makes crystalline silica hazardous. So how is it we can flip this? How do we manage to do this? How do we do a hazard inversion? What gives us the ability to do that? Well, let's take a look at the OSHA regulation. Let's see what it says. Appendix A. 1910-1200, mandatory. The criteria are semi-quantitative or qualitative, and expert judgment is required to interpret the data. That's really important. What that means is somebody shouldn't be interpreting data unless they've got a solid background and they consider themselves or are considered by others to be an expert. The criteria for determining health hazards are test method neutral. They do not specify a particular test method as long as the methods are scientifically validated. Everything RJ Lee Group does here uses scientifically validated methods that are internationally recognized. There are no methods that I'll present to you today that do not meet those criteria. A chemical need not be classified when it can be shown by conclusive experimental data from scientifically validated test methods that it's not biologically available. That's critical. I just showed you what biological availability means. If it's not below 5 microns, it's not biologically available. It's going to get hung up in the upper airways. For Prop 65, we make that exemption and go to 10 because of their DOL basis. But for GHS purposes, we don't care about anything above 5 microns, and we also don't care about anything below 0.4, if you remember that little term. There's reasons for that I won't get into here. Epidemiological data and experience on the effects of chemicals on humans. This is kind of important. OC data, data from accident databases, shall be taken into account in the evaluation of human health hazards. Now, how does this affect everybody? If you've been running an operation for 30 years and you've been keeping good medical records, you have a good comp program, you've got medical management systems in place, your database on whether a worker has ever experienced deleterious effects due to exposure to the chemical or products you produce can be used by our epidemiologist to then exempt your product from hazard classification. Conclusive data may demonstrate that the hazard of an ingredient will not be evident, does not present a health risk, when present at a level above the specified cutoff value concentration limits. In these cases, the mixture may be classified according to those data. What I'm going to show you today is play sand. As you can imagine, the crystalline silica content in play sand is well above 0.1%. Yet we don't classify it. This gives us the right to do that. Finally, when there is scientific evidence demonstrating a mechanism or mode of action is not relevant to humans, the chemical should not be classified. This becomes very important when we get into finished products where we have a reaction, we have some kind of a chelation effect going on, we have binding. This webinar is not designed for that discussion. So, with that said, what we want to know is what's the true RCS concentration in your product? What harm can it actually cause? To start this gig, we're going to use XRD. XRD is a very good method for looking at mineralogical species that are crystalline in character. And we're going to take that play sand and we're going to put it in the X-ray and we're going to run it for a number of hours until we get really good detail on all the mineralogical species that exist in that material. And in the case of play sand, what we find out is it's actually 68% quartz, not 100, not 90, not 80. It's only 70% quartz. The rest of it is calcite, a bunch of different feldspars, some mica illite, dolomite, chlorite groups, and 10% amorphous. Amorphous means that it's an amalgam. So in other words, we have a number of different minerals and elements that are bound together. They're not crystalline in nature. They're just kind of a agglomerate. And we see that in a lot of materials. The minerals and the elements that are bound up in that amorphous cannot cause harm because they are not bioavailable. So here we have the final result. We know that as presented natural play sand contains 68.4% crystalline silica. couple of notes. XRD bulk reporting limit for total crystalline silica is 0.1%. That becomes important. XRD bulk cannot distinguish between respirable and non-respirable crystalline silica. It doesn't even try. So, we're not there yet. We need to fractionate that material very carefully so that we can get that fraction between 0.4, which is our lower threshold, and 10, which is our upper threshold. And we need to do it in such a manner that that respirable particulate is not affected by the process. Okay. So what we have done is we've designed a meticulous means of collecting that naturally occurring particulate residue, no chemicals involved, no physical agents involved, and in fact, what we're going to use is a biological solution. We're going to take it and we're going to compare it to what would happen if it was in your lungs, if it was in your throat, if it was in your nose, if it was on your skin, using biomaterials. And we're going to carefully massage that material through a 38 micron wet sieve fractionation process, and we're going to wash it, and we're going to wash it, and we're going to wash it, and we're going to try to draw off all the respirable particulate that would naturally come off of that material in a biological environment. Once we've collected the filtrate from the 38 micron, we're then going to process that filtrate through a 10 micron vacuum filter, and we're going to get rid of everything above 10 microns. We're going to take that filtrate and we're going to put a backstop on it to 0.4. We're going to let everything below 0.4 go because we don't care about it. We're going to let everything above 10 go because we don't care about it. And we're going to capture that residue amount that occurs between 0.4 and 10. That is the respirable fraction under GHS and Prop 65. So how's this lay out when we're done with it? So, for example, at the top, starting with 10 grams of natural place sand, and we fractionate it through the sieve, we end up with 9.9 grams of greater than 38 micron. On the right, we see that we end up with 73 milligrams of 10 to 38. We end up with 3 milligrams of 0.4 to 10. Our fractionation total is 99.97%. So in other words, there's only 0.03% respirable particulate in this material. You've already cleared GHS. It cannot possibly be above 0.1% if you only have 0.03% in the respirable fraction. How good are we at what we do? At the very bottom right, you'll see that our total loss on fractionation from that 10 grams all the way through, we have accounted for 99.75% of the material. In the process, we've only lost 0.25%, which can occur on surfaces, it can occur into the air, it can occur wherever, we don't know. But we like fractionations that end up less than 1% because that means we did a nice, clean, very meticulous process. All right, so now we've got our residue. What are we going to do with it? We're going to put it into a method that RJ Lee Group developed for doing crystalline air samples. And our detection level is much lower than most laboratories in the world. We go down to 2.5 micrograms per filter. Now remember, we started with 10 grams. So we're now going to look at a detection of 2.5 micrograms per filter. We have 3 milligrams of material. If you look at the very bottom right, you'll see at the bottom of the peaks, that red line at the bottom, just above the blue one, which is the blank, is the 2.5 micrograms. Extreme sensitivity. So we've split the 3 milligrams in half because we're going to run it on 2 different methods, and I'll show you the second method in a minute. So we actually gave XRD air 1.5 milligrams on a filter. We're going to run it into the 2.5 micrograms per filter detection limit, and we're going to get a weight percentage in the end here. We're going to find out that that fraction, that 1.5 milligrams, contains 20% crystalline silica. When we do the back calculations with a 99.97% loss, we find out that the amount of crystalline silica in that respirable residue is actually 0.006%. So XRD air LOQ for total crystalline silica and a respirable size fraction using the VFF separation, that vacuum filter fractionation method, is 0.01. That's what we validated it to. The XRD air cannot distinguish between free and bioavailable or bound and impure. Of course, we don't care because we're already well below the 0.1%. Nevertheless, this could become important for certain materials. We want to know if it's free and bioavailable, or if that crystalline silica that's in that respirable fraction is actually bound up and impure. For that, we're going to go to CCSEM with IntelliSem. The way CCSEM works, it's a sea of particles across the filter. It comes up against a particle, it detects the leading edge, it then goes into analysis, it determines the size of that particle, and it determines the elemental content. So what we want to know is how many particles in the size fractions less than 5 and in the fraction less than 10 are actually SiO2. And when we do that, we find out that only 1% of the particles in that fraction less than 10 are SiO2 rich. In other words, they're not contaminated with other materials. This does not tell us about crystallinity, only the Si rich. But if it isn't Si rich, it cannot be crystalline silica. So we've got our XRD result. For XRD error, we know that there's 20% crystalline silica in this little tiny fraction. From that, we now know that there's only 1% silica rich, which is much less than the silica by XRD error. So as a result, most of that silica is bound up with other material, and it is not free and bioavailable. So the XRCM result, which stands for X-ray, Raman, CCSEM, and metals, comes in at 0.0003% for silica rich. Now, we don't use that number for our LOQ, but the LOQ we've developed for CCSEM and IntelliSem for silica rich with VFF separation is 0.001%. And as toxicologists, our belief is anything less than 0.001% becomes stupidville, and we recommend that it's non-detectable. Because generally what we've seen in release studies that under 2% you get non-detect on the air filters. CCSEM cannot distinguish between crystalline and non-crystalline. However, from a conservative perspective, obviously if it isn't silica rich, it can't be crystalline silica. So our results are 68.4 in the bulk, less than 10 by VFF and XRD error is less than 0.01. Less than 10 by VFF and CCSEM is less than 0.001. We do not classify. And what we do to support that is we advise this safety data sheet information that the crystalline silica SiO2 non-respirable be what's reported, 68%, and that you add the language. It says we've gone through this with XRCM analysis, and this product is incapable of causing toxicologically relevant RCS exposure under other normal conditions of use or in extreme upset scenarios. Additional information just says that we've gone through this material in extreme detail in characterizing it, and we know that there isn't anything else in it that's going to cause harm either. So finally, let's look at Prop 65. What do we do with Prop 65? Well, Prop 65 is a risk management decision for every company to make on their own. As mentioned to you, our philosophy is anything less than 0.001 is non-detectable. Okay, in order to achieve that, we need to get to CCSEM. In order to achieve GHS, it can be done with XRD Bulk, it can be done with any VFF XRD error, CCSEM, or a method that I haven't discussed and won't discuss here, which involves Raman and CCSEM, where we determine the particles of interest by CCSEM and then analyze them by Raman, which can actually do crystalline silica, and again takes us even lower because now we're looking at specific particles. So this is a company-by-company decision that needs to be made. And with that, I want to thank you for participating in this today.
Thank you so much, Don. That was great. Just a reminder for everyone that after we're going to get to questions here, and then after the questions that Don answers, a survey is going to pop up. It's just 3 questions, a few seconds of your time, will help us to offer better content in the future and let us know how we are doing. Before we get to the questions as well, here's a reminder on our next 2 spring webinars. Again, just go to our main webpage, rjlg.com. At the bottom, you'll see events, and we'll post our webinar series there periodically. So let me look at these questions for Don here. I have a question here that says, Don, conservatively, how often do you run this study to ensure our results stay under requirements?
Okay, I'm not sure what that question is. We do this every day. So we do products across a wide spectrum. We'll do plastics, we do diatomaceous earth, we do perlite, we do fly ash, we do a lot of carbon products. We do a tremendous number of products. That almost everything we run, we also check crystalline silica if it's any kind of a mineral product at all, and make sure that it doesn't have crystalline silica. Obviously, play sand's kind of a unique animal in that its focus is crystalline silica, which is why we used it for validation. But we do this every day. Does that answer that question? I think so.
Okay, thank you. Here's another question, Don. Is the SWERF method for RCS determination considered to be scientifically validated by OSHA?
I don't know that OSHA hasn't specified any methods. OSHA doesn't like the fact that we do this fractionation and respirable. I've met with a lot of OSHA people over the years. Basically what happens is everybody's a grandpa and a father, and they hit reality pretty quick once they see the presentation. Swerf that's a really good question, because Swerf is an accepted international method. It is a validated international method for doing separation. The problem we have with Swerf is that a lot of these separation methods that use density use a de-agglomerating fluid, or they use DI water, neither of which are biologically natural. And we see huge differences in fractionation between sedimentation methods and the biological filter fractionation method, which is why we settled on VFF as the method of choice. The other problem is that some of these methods don't do the starting versus ending material, so you don't have that weight determination of what your losses were during the process. And obviously, unless we know that we didn't lose material during the process, we don't want to use the results.
Okay. Here's one. Doesn't OSHA require reporting of total respirable silica carcinogenic hazard classification?
No, OSHA requires that you report carcinogens. Now, this is a risk management option, and we've written a number of regulatory briefs related to this. We list the crystalline silica on the safety data sheet and put non-respirable because you can't inhale rocks. Since it's not bioavailable, and I showed you the 1910, 1200 exemptions. Since it is not bioavailable, it cannot cause harm, and it's exempt from GHS and HazCom 2012 classification. What we do, however, is that we state in Section 3 how we derive that opinion and what the basis was for that opinion. But as long as you're less than 0.1% of the carcinogen itself, which is the bioavailable crystalline silica, our recommendation is that you do not identify your material as hazardous.
Thank you, Don. Here's another question. Once a product is validated as being below thresholds or not biologically available, how often would a company need to reevaluate it, if at all? Is that established in the OSHA or Prop 65 regulations? Yeah.
Good question. We work with clients all the time on that issue, and that's a product quality assurance problem. And normally what we recommend is quarterlies. And you don't need to go through this whole rigor process on a quarterly. We just need to verify that your product hasn't changed. And that can be done in a number of different ways, much less expensively. So what you want to know is that your ore bodies have not changed dramatically. And what we also advise clients is where you do see a change from quarter to quarter, don't get all excited about it, that it goes up or goes down, as long as you don't see that consistent pattern that your ore bodies are always moving up. If that's the case, then you're going to want to reclassify and maybe look at it again. But quarterlies are generally what we would recommend to people. And one of the problems is this analysis is only as good as the sample we receive. So we also advise doing aliquots throughout the course of production during a period of time and giving us a blended sample that represents that period.
Okay. Have you ever done a test on quarried granite like you did for play sand?
If you're talking about freshly fractured, the answer is no. We have not. So that would be an interesting study to run, but we have not had anyone who's wanted to provide that. One of the reasons we went with play sand and beach sand was to present the argument that the fact that it's not bioavailable also means that it's not hazardous. If it cannot be in the lower alveolar regions of the lung, then it's not bioavailable. You cannot inhale rocks. And the bottom line is whether it's play sand. Now realize play sand is washed. beach sand is washed. The quarry material that you're talking about has not been washed, and there's a very good chance you got a higher respirable fraction, but we have not tested for that. We have tested a lot of quarry materials, don't get me wrong, whether it's diatomaceous earth, whether it's perlite, whether it's any of the other mine materials that we characterize. A lot of that is fresh, but it's not quarry. It's not from a rock quarry.
What is the cost of this type of analysis?
Well, these are actually research projects, so there is no standard fee, although we do have fees that we estimate for the work. The cost for this ranges from anywhere from about 3 times what our commodity group charges for standard analysis methods to 10 times. So it depends on the work that you're doing. For example, the vacuum filter fractionation, that process alone can take up to 2 weeks, and our average price for that is around $750. It depends on the material. Some materials fractionate very easily. Some materials take a long time at the 38 micron sieve to stop releasing particles. We want to sieve until we no longer see particles in the filtrate coming off. And that's under bright light and examination. So once we stop seeing particles in the filtrate, we stop sieving, and then from there it moves to the fractionation. Sometimes we have materials that bind up on the surface of the filters. So then we've got another set of problems. Now realize we only start with a very small amount, in most cases about 0.5 gram. So the 10 grams was for place sand, just to kind of emphasize the high concentration of greater than 38. But generally we only start with 0.5 gram of materials, so we don't run into those problems. The XRD air with that high sensitivity is obviously a more expensive method, and the CCSEM with IntelliSem is unique in that we've set the criteria from a toxicological perspective, and so that too takes a lot longer to run. So all the things we do, when you get into the Raman and CCSEM inter-instrumental, that can run into the many thousands of dollars. So easily our average project is around $1,500 to $3,000.
Thank you, Don. For Prop 65, do you use this information to get a safe use determination or just bypass that product?
Well, unfortunately, we haven't had a client willing to step up and pay us for the safe use determination. The state of California, OEHA, charges $10,000 to file the paperwork, and that as a result is kind of a prohibiting factor for people. From there, they charge by the hour. We've tried to get them to accept one SUD for another product. For example, if we're doing 5 products of the same, the only difference is they might come from a different location in the ore body, et cetera, et cetera. They have refused to do that. It's been very frustrating for us. We've spent a lot of hours on the phone with them, as well as some colleagues of ours and other firms, and we have not been able to get them to loosen up these SUD rules. And at this point, it appears the SUD filing and success would run around $25,000 to $50,000, and we just simply haven't had the clients willing to step up. And you'll notice there are only 3 SUDs that have been accomplished for crystalline silica because of the costs involved. Be glad to do one if anybody wants one. We're ready.
I saw 2 different questions that said that the handout, the product stewardship data sheet, which explains XRCM, they had trouble loading it, so I apologize to those 2 people. I will send you that product stewardship data sheet directly, so look out for that, and thank you for bringing that to my attention.
We also have additional materials available. We have a white paper as well as some regulatory briefs that have been written. If you would like to contact me directly, I can share some of that with you. Obviously, that's a little bit more proprietary, so I would ask that you contact me directly for those.
And Don, several comments were left. Is a copy of this presentation available? If they contact you, can you share some of it?
Absolutely. In fact, if you go out on the web, you'll find a 90-minute in-depth presentation on the Product Stewardship Society. They do charge a fee for that. You'll also find the recorded webinar from last year's Product Stewardship Society, as well as a number of others. If you search my name and silica or RJ Lee, you're probably going to come up with about 5 pages on Google from my prior work in nanotechnology, but you will find a lot of available presentations that cover other subjects besides just this one, but we'll make this available.
Okay, I think that looks like that is it for our questions, unless we got a late one here. there is another one. If both quartz and cristobalite are present in a product, can they be reported on the SDS together under the same CAS number, or must they be listed as separate ingredients?
If your cristobalite content is greater than 0.1%, we recommend listing it. And then also looking at whether it's bioavailable, and that's your choice. You'll notice that cristobalite is rarely formed. We do see it in products, but they're always heat-treated products or calcined materials. And generally it's bound. We have not found free cristobalite in any of our work thus far, although we do see it in materials that have been heat-treated. So the SDS is cast number based. So you're going to want, and we do put both cast numbers into our Section 3 language when they both apply, but I would separate those because it is cast-based system.
Okay, that's it for our questions. Thank you very much, Don, for your presentation today. And thank you to everyone for joining RJ Lee Group today. Everyone stay healthy out there.
Don't forget to fill out that survey for us. It's real important. Thank you.
Thank you.